basically intelligence doesn't define success.
Asian children can count to 40
Yeah.
by the age of 4, whereas American children can't until they're 5. They put in hard work, they grafted, they learned the skills, but they also got that little bit of luck that you sometimes need.
The thing is, yeah, that luck isn't like some magical special luck that's just God's gonna drop and throw on you in that time. Like, it's not that. Like, you create luck.
Welcome back to Book Reviews with Fly. But today we are changing the name. We are going to change the name of this channel to The Power of Pages. So if you're new to the channel, welcome to the new Power of Pages. If you've been here, you've been watching our videos, yeah, we're changing the name. So
sometimes you have to rebrand a little bit. I'm saying,
yeah, rebrand. So The Power of Pages is our new name. And this month we are reading, or we read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And for those that don't know, we pick one book a month. I pick one book, then Chris or Mr. Fly picks another book the following month. We review it each month. So this was my pick. The reason I chose it is I've read this about 4 or 5 years ago, quite a while ago, and I remember enjoying it back then. And I thought, actually, let's give it another go. So yeah, that's why I picked it. Mr. Fly, good morning. Or well,
good morning.
In the morning. I don't know when the viewers are watching it, but yeah, let's just kick start, man. First impressions of the book.
Yeah, I loved it. Well, first impressions, I wasn't aware, and it's a book I was aware of, but I didn't know. I didn't, I mean, I think I might have even used that phrase a few times before, being an outlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I was happy to read it. When you recommended it, I was like, oh, finally you're letting this one off, because you like to keep you give me some, but you kind of drip feed the gems, isn't it? So yeah, I'm joking. But yeah, no, I was happy to read it. Like, first impressions, the name doesn't give anything away. Malcolm Gladwell, I'm aware of him. He's wrote a few other books. I think there's another book he might have read. No, that wasn't him. But anyway, I've seen him on a few interviews. And yeah, I was happy to read the book. So
yeah, okay. I mean, this book, let's just summarize it. Essentially, this book talks about what they call outliers, or particular people or particular events or scenarios or circumstances because of specific circumstances. I didn't explain that very well at all.
No. He puts it very succinctly. He just says this book is about men or women who do things that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And then it kind of explains the reasons behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that's pretty much what it is? You do things out of the ordinary. Yeah. And then why the factors that come into play.
Yeah. And there's so many examples. We're not going to get the opportunity to go through all of them today, because there's so many examples and so many I actually enjoyed. But was there any particular examples that you wanted to talk about and discuss? Because there's a few I do. So.
There's a few. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was thinking to myself, I just want to know where the similarities are, like what you agree with, what you liked and what I liked. There was a lot. I liked the beginning of the book as a whole. The middle, I wasn't too keen on. Just got a bit boring for me. But then the end, I also quite liked. But the Matthew effect was the first 2 chapters, even the first 3 chapters. The one I'll stick on though is one I think, and I've heard this referred to a lot. I'm not sure if this book coined this phrase, but I've heard this a lot, especially in sports and even in other things as well. It goes, but the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that before you read the book?
I can't remember because I read it 4 or 5 years ago. So I was aware of it before I read it this time. But yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, the 10,000 hour rule. And it's funny because before I got to that chapter, I had a conversation with someone, a friend of mine who's like an aspiring actor. And he's only been acting for a couple of years now. And he's like, yeah, he just said like, it's a throwaway comment, like, yeah, man, I'm trying to get to that 10,000 hours. But I knew what he meant. Like, because I've known, that was before kind of reading that chapter. So for people that don't know, the 10,000 hour rule is you need 10,000 of practice is required to achieve a level of mastery associated with being a world-class expert. And that can apply to whatever you're doing, whether that's sports, whether that's music, whether that's painting, reading. Do you know what I mean? Whatever it is that you do. So you kind of need to put in that 10,000 hours. It breaks it down into that 10,000 hours can be about 10 years, is roughly depending on a certain, but that's a dedicated practice. And I think there's another book, because a friend of mine read this and we spoke about this 10,000 hours. And I think Serena and Venus Williams, they, you know, the younger you start, the quicker you hit that 10,000 hours, basically. So, you know, if you have a child that's 8 and starts playing, let's say tennis now, starts playing tennis at 8, and they're doing, by the time they're 18, and you see this, you see champions, you know, at a young age, and it's because they've hit their 10,000 hours. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the tennis player, I forget her name, the young one, British Raducanu, I think her name is. I can't remember. Anyway, young British tennis player. She won something. I'm awful with with it, but that's the first thing that springs to mind. But the 10,000 hour rule actually relates to some of examples in the book as well, because I want to touch on hockey players, because it talks about how successful the reasons some hockey players are successful. I believe this is from Canada.
Chapter 1.
But essentially, those born in the first half of the year are more likely to become successful hockey players. When they looked at the Hockey Player League, the majority of players were born in January, February, March, the first half of the year. And it explains why, because I found this, you know, astonishing. And essentially, when the children are young, their school years run from January to December. In January, in Canada, someone born in January will be the oldest in their school year, and someone born in December will be the youngest in their school year. So those in January will typically be bigger and more advanced, more advanced in general, more developed. The hockey teams out there, they scout the players from so young, when they're so young. So as soon as they scout them, they scout the players that are, you know, bigger and stronger and more advanced, and those happen to be, you know, those earlier on in January, February, March. They then get put into the best training and they have the best coaches because they're showing the best signs of becoming, you know, superior hockey players. But in reality, it's not that they're the best. It's just that they're more advanced for their age year, for their age group. They're more advanced in their peers. So they get to the 10,000 hour faster than someone born in December, because those in December aren't given the same opportunities. They're not scouted. They're not scouted as much because they're not as advanced. They're smaller. They're not as advanced. And I found that quite astonishing.
Yeah. I mean, and it feeds on because they get the scouted players, the higher talented players, higher talent in inverted commas, they get exposed to a higher level of coaching, more focus on them as an individual, and they develop faster. But yeah, that's something. But then it's quite uncanny when you see the list of the top players and their birthdays are all within the same month. It's crazy. But then also it talks about education, and that's the thing. There's two sides to this coin, because this is positive for the ones that are kind of like, it's positive for the ones that are born earlier in the year, but then for the ones that are born later on in the year, they're maybe overlooked. And then that can also happen in education. I think I used to work in some schools, so I've seen this happen. And it says that was in chapter 1, what you're talking about, the Matthew effect. And it says, in education, this can lead to teachers confusing maturity with ability. Do you see what I mean? So someone's developed, and in the UK, the school years don't run from January to December. They run from September to July. So it's kind of different. So same thing, if you're born in August, X, Y, Z. So the children that are born kind of at the front of the year, they develop, they're more advanced, they're more mature. So their intelligence might be a little bit higher. So then they get put into the higher sets and so on and so forth. But as you kind of go through the school process, you would hope that that would kind of balance itself out, but it doesn't always in all cases. But
Mm.
yeah, that was the 10,000 hours. We'll go back to that. That was an interesting chapter to me. But yeah, it's the thing about I liked about this book is like the chapters would start with something, and you think, okay, then you realize when you realize his style of writing, you'll just think, you know, I'm gonna jump right across to like the one about the airlines now, for example. He starts talking about like rice paddies in China or Asia, and you're just thinking to yourself, where is this gonna go? You see what I mean? Where is this gonna go? I mean, we could maybe go. I don't want to jump over.
Yeah,
but,
well, I mean, we can jump around. It doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so that's chapter 7, the ethnic theory of plane crashes.
Yeah.
No, that's not the one. Sorry, excuse me. No, it's not that one. It's rice paddies and maths test. That's the one. Sorry, chapter 8. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, chapter 8. So it talks about Asian rice farmers way back when. I don't know the years, but how they basically they appreciate hard work, really hard work. You know, did you take much notes on the rice paddies? Do you want to?
Yeah, I took notes on it. Yeah, more on the maths part of it.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah,
so basically they would. This is really a bridge, but they were rice farmers essentially. So they would go and they get rice. It's just hard work. You know, read the book if you want more information on it. But then that culture of hard work and finishing and working on a task and being disciplined, waking up early, going to bed late, waking up early again. That became a cultural norm. And then that now is so that's how the chapter would start with, just talking about people working hard and poverty and all this kind of stuff. Then you're thinking to yourself, what's that got to do with maths tests? That's what I was thinking anyway. And then obviously once you get further, but when you know his style of writing, you're like, okay, where is this going? So then you see, and now that, you know, there's people associate that Asians are really good at maths. And it's like, oh, they're just born that way, genetically, they're born that way. That's kind of like some stereotypes that people have. Now, in this book, he explains that because of the culture of being in the rice paddies and the things that are said, like there's be sayings like, oh, you know, if you're lazy, you'll have a poor life, and if you don't work hard, your life will be full of strife and all this kind of stuff. That has translated itself to a culture of hard work and finishing a task and not quitting easily and all that kind of stuff, and that translates itself to solving math problems and whatnot. I mean, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I definitely want to add to that because that I like this chapter. I really like this chapter a lot because it talks about the stereotypes of why Asian culture generally are better at maths. And actually it says Asian children can count to 40 by the age of 4, whereas American children can't until they're 5. And there are actually specific reasons for this, which I found so interesting. But yeah, one is the fact that the culture, they're born into this culture of hard work, because like you said, with the rice paddies, it's really difficult to grow the rice fields. They have to be very specific about it. Any part of the process goes wrong, they won't develop. So they're born into this very strict and hardworking culture, but also their number system is different to us in the UK, to English-speaking languages, and also to European, because let me explain. So the way we count in England is we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When we get to 10, it goes 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on, which is a little bit confusing when you compare it to the ways Asian count, because they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then they count 11 as 10, 1, 12 as 10, 2, 13 as 10, 3, and so on. And then when they get to 20, it's 21, 22. So they do that all throughout their number system. So I hope I'm making sense.
No, it's making sense.
So when it comes to adding maths and timesing maths, when with the English language, we say 15 times 12, for example, we have to convert the word 15 into what that number means. We have to think, what is 15? 15 is 10 and 5. 12 is 10 and 2. We have to make that quick conversion and then do the calculation. Whereas in Asian cultures, they don't have to do that conversion because of the way their number system is set up. It's much quicker, or it's a fraction of a second, it's just maybe a second quicker for them to do the calculation because they don't have to make that conversion. And I found that astonishing because I mean that counting system, along with the culture of hard work, and they work their school system are extremely long days. Those combined make Asians typically very better at maths than those in the Western world.
I think what it does, it gives an explanation as to your general stereotypical explanation. It's like, okay, going back to the 10,000 hours, or even the thing about the plane crashes. It's like, we'll talk about that one next, maybe, or you can pick one. But it's like it gives a reason behind the result. So it's not just like even when you look at like people that are successful, it talks about Bill Gates, obviously, and books we've read previously, The Unfair Advantage. It's like you would just think, oh, he's super smart. Of course he's going to do this, or she's super talented. Of course she was going to be, and it talks about, there was another chapter that I liked, the problem with geniuses. That was quite interesting to me because I'll talk about that maybe after. But it's like, you kind of just think, oh yeah, this person's really intelligent. You look in class, you know who the smart people were in your class. You know whether you're one of them or not. Yeah. So then you kind of look around and you think, oh, this person's super smart. They're definitely going to do this and that. And then they make them go on to do that, definitely. And then, but you would just think, oh yeah, it's because they're super smart. But there's a story behind him. And I think he wraps it up really well in the last chapter about this happened. It's cause and effect. And this happened and that happened and this happened that you've got zero control over, because this stuff will happen centuries before you were born, your great grandparents. So it's like, and that was interesting to me. It's like, okay, there's reasons behind the result, so if that makes any sense.
Do you know one of the things I liked about this book when it talks about outliers, because successful people, we just think, they're super smart, they've worked really hard, and in a lot of cases, that is a massive contributing factor to why they've been successful. But I think the way the book talks about successful people is it's the fact that they've worked hard, they've done all these things, but also they've got some luck on the way. And not only have they experienced luck, they've taken advantage of that luck. So they've made the most of their lucky opportunities. And I want to touch on but I guess Bill Joy and Bill Gates, who are both like tech wizards. I think everyone watching this probably knows who Bill Gates is, the founder of Microsoft. But Bill Joy is someone who maybe people don't. I didn't know of Bill Joy before this. I believe he created the internet. I'm just going back through my notes here. But essentially, they were in very, very unique circumstances that allowed them to be the tech gurus that they are. So for example, Bill Joy wrote the code for the internet.
Oh yes, and it's still being used today, right? That code is still being used today.
That code is still being used today.
Yes.
And he went to Michigan University, which was one of the only universities that had a computer. So firstly, that's his first stroke of luck. He went to, at that time, back in those days, not many universities had computers. He happened to go to a university that had a computer. So stroke of luck one. The computers that they had could instantly check code. And in their system, they found a loophole to be able to use the computer for over an hour. So at this time, it was quite expensive. Computers could only be used for an hour, so they could only practice coding for an hour. But someone he knew, or he himself, found a loophole that allowed him to practice for over an hour. So he could practice loads of time coding. So again, second stroke of luck. They've got a loophole now where they can code and practice coding for as long as they want. This allowed him to practice his 10,000 hours and become so good at coding. And it gave him the skills to, do whatever technical thing he did to make the internet work. Or I was a bit confused as to what he actually did. It was a bit confusing, but yeah, he still had to put in that hard work. He still had to go and do those hours, but he was lucky to go into the university that he was at that had a computer. Not many universities had computers at the time. And he was lucky that they found a loophole that allowed him to practice on the computer for longer than the structured hour that most computers had.
Yeah, no. I think, and this, but again, it's like, this why when I was reading this, I was like, every chapter you kind of put yourself, I put myself in this chapter, like, where would I do, how would I respond to that? And I think with that scenario about the internet and obviously with Bill Gates, they still had to do the work.
Yes.
So you still got to do the work at the end of the day.
Yes.
But what was interesting as well, that chapter, I didn't make many notes on that one, but I remember that a lot of the tech gurus and these original guys and the Silicon Valley guys that were kind of the founders of, where we are now, if you want to call it that, they were all born in the same kind of year, or this, they were born in this, and that was interesting again, and that shows that was a turn of a century where a lot of budding web creators or whatever were born in that same time with those same opportunities, but it was limited. It was like just that opportunity to have access to a computer, and then found that kind of loophole, wherever it might be, or being able to go to a school that actually has a computer. So that gave them the opportunity to become an outlier in that sense, where they now began developing. So it was cool, man. It was good. It was like the book, and I like Malcolm Gladwell's. I like his style of writing. It's quite informal. It's not necessarily a boring style of writing. So yeah, it was interesting, man.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
There's so many other examples that we can go on. But I guess I want to touch on there's a few others, but did you take much on the Jewish lawyer story?
A little bit. I found that chapter quite boring, to be honest.
Okay.
But yeah, a little bit. Again, similar sort of thing. They obviously, Joe Flom was the name of the chapter was named after him.
Yeah.
The lessons from Joe Flom, and the type of law they practiced at the time when he first started practicing law or became a lawyer, that was undesirable. A lot of lawyers weren't trying to take those jobs, but because they were kind of at the bottom of the totem pole, they were taking up all those jobs. They were doing all those little dibby jobs. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think when the kind of culture shifted in America, where people now claims culture and suing culture, basically, when that came into play, now those type of lawyers were the ones that people were going to more so. So then they had a competitive advantage because they've been doing it. They'd already got their 10,000 hours.
Yeah,
they've been doing this for
20 years,
hundreds of for 20 years prior to that. So they were ready. And I think he related that back to something about knitting, about clothes or something like that. Was it markets or something?
Yes, there was another story about
in that chapter
aprons.
Yes,
I didn't take much notes on that.
Anyway, the point is again, the chapter started randomly talking about aprons and stuff like that, and then it kind of went on to talking about how Joe Flom, and I think he's like a really high-powered lawyer, but I didn't take much notes on that. But that's just
okay. For the viewers, essentially, they took the law jobs or the law cases that the mainstream or the big lawyers didn't want to take. They really specialized in this particular type of law, and they got so good at it that when it did boom 20 years later, they were the go-to people for that type of law, and that helped to blow up their company and make it boom. And the big law firms were coming to them for their lawyers. So again, they took advantage of the opportunity at the time. They took the work that they could get, and then when that work became more sought after, they were in the right position to capitalize off it. So again, they put in hard work, they grafted, they learned the skills, but they also got that little bit of luck that that you sometimes need when, you know, the culture shifted and things blew up. So,
but it's timing. It's timing, isn't
timing,
it?
yeah.
Like when timing meets practice, you know, when you've been like
Yes.
they were just timing was just perfect for them. So
Yeah. I think one of the points I want to drive home is that you know, work hard. People, you know, should still work hard, but we need to understand that sometimes we need to get lucky. And when we do get lucky, we need to take advantage of it. Yeah, I think, yeah, take advantage of luck. What's the saying?
But Tyler, yeah, I know you're thinking of the richest man in Babylon. Are you thinking back to that? Because that's remember there's a bit about the luck. Don't remember, but I
No,
was gonna say anyway, just before you say, I don't throw you off. But the thing is, yeah, that luck isn't like some magical special luck that's just God's gonna drop and throw on you in that time. Like it's not that. Like you create luck in the sense of doing the work and taking that advantage of that situation when it's put forward to you. Do you know what I mean? So because look, let's be real. This Joe Flom, he wasn't the only lawyer in America that had been doing the grind for the 20 years prior. There was others. But at the same time, he was the one who maybe he saw an opportunity where the others didn't. Or maybe he had that idea to scale when not. So yes, he was lucky in maybe timing, but at the same time, he wasn't lucky because he just created an opportunity and took advantage of an opportunity when it came to him. Just, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just don't want people to kind of think that like, oh, you know, it just came and they just said, oh, here you go, here, take all these cases. Do you know what I'm saying? He must, because he would still have been facing stigma. You know, even if you've got these big companies coming into you, these big law firms coming in, you have to be able to meet them at their level and talk and negotiate at their level and whatever you need to do. Do you see what I mean? So it's not just like, oh, you know, oh, you're lucky. Here, thanks, Joe. Take all these cases. So just let's remember that.
Yeah. I think as well, I guess off the back of that, I want to talk about because I think there are some elements to luck, you know. I want to touch on it because, you know, we are lucky to be born, for example, in London. We're lucky that we spoke about it before, that we've not been born in like a war-torn country. We've been born into a city where there are opportunities there, you know. So I guess we are lucky in that respect. In fact, we're lucky to be alive. Do you know what I mean? The chances of us even being alive. So the reason I say all of this to say, Chris Langan, they talk about Chris Langan, who I don't know if you took anything on this.
Yeah, I watched his episode. I watched it.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched it. I watched it.
His IQ was off the scale. So his IQ score off the scale. And he went on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Millionaire Show in America. And when he got to the £250,000 mark, he took the money because he worked out that his statistical odds were better off taking the money than continuing on to go and get the million. But he was just you know, I believe just what we say a regular guy. He had a higher IQ than who was the other one it compared to?
It was, I don't know.
I can't remember, but yeah, he was essentially just a regular guy. And in theory, he was so smart, but he was I don't know what his job was, but he wasn't a millionaire, he wasn't a successful businessman. Do you see where I'm going with this? He didn't have those fortunate series of events that allowed him to take advantage of his IQ. Yeah,
I think that was interesting. That Chris Langan, because I watched the show. The show was called 1 versus 100. Okay. But before I talk about that, you see what you're saying about the luck?
Yeah.
The luck stops with being born into the right system, right society. Because you could have been born with the right. Like for me, the luck stops like you said, to be born in an era where you've got opportunities, in a city where there's opportunities, whatnot. I think that's the lucky thing. You know, to actually be born is the lucky thing. And then after that, you're kind of, that's actually luck where it's just serendipity, or it's just you know, you're a blessing. But then besides that, I think you kind of have to create that like a manifest situation. That's my opinion on it. But where the guard in that chapter 3, the problem with geniuses with Chris Langan, I think he had a high IQ, but then low emotional IQ. I'm saying he was low emotionally. So I think because he had an issue with he was always having issues with his tutors because they didn't realize how smart he was. So, and because his story is really interesting story actually. His life growing up was quite a hard life. Very hard life actually. So these things must have knocked his confidence, and people didn't necessarily, they kind of would have typecast him and saying, oh, he's just from this area, or his family's this kind of family. So when he kind of faced small challenges where he wasn't getting the appreciation from his lecturers, he didn't go about it the right way, and it affected the outcome of his life. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So one good thing he raised from in that chapter, because IQ tests, when they say he's got an IQ of this and IQ of X, Y, and then I always think, what's an IQ test? Like, what do they actually do? What do they do? Do you know what I mean? Like, but they kind of broke it down, it's like problem solving and stuff like that. But then I think, what did he say? He said, yeah, they should have, instead of an IQ test, they should have a divergence test or something like that, where it kind of just sees different ways. So like they put it in the book actually, it's like, okay, they'll give you a brick. What can this brick be used for?
Oh yeah.
And it's just like, do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, man, that's more practical to, I don't know, that's the way I see it. That's more practical to like.
No, I think someone with a high IQ didn't have many creative ways of how to use the brick. It was just like, to build a house. Whereas someone else, they call it an analytical intelligence versus practical intelligence. So the person with practical intelligence was like, okay, I can use the brick as a doorstop. I can use the brick to break a window. I can use the brick to do weight training. Do you know what I mean? They come up with way more uses for that brick. Whereas someone with the, I believe, analytical intelligence was just like, oh, well, a brick is to build houses.
But the thing is, you need both. We need both in society. Do you know what I mean? We need both in society. But yeah, they said here, instead of an IQ test, why not a divergence test? A test that requires you to use your imagination and takes your mind in different directions, in as many different directions as possible. So I mean, so I guess, so that for me was like really more interesting. I'm like, yeah, how creative can you be? How many things if I showed you this bottle now, what could this, how many, and those are the things that kids really excel at because they're so creative. So I mean, but yeah, going back to Chris Langan, I think his issue was like, he just didn't have the other side of it. Like he was super intelligent. I think they said more intelligent than Einstein on paper, but he didn't have the kind of social skills or the emotional intelligence. And I think as well, as he got older and he realized how smart he was, and he realized that he hadn't, I don't want to say he hadn't maybe hit the heights that he thought someone of his intelligence should hit, he kind of was a little bit bitter about it. So that was interesting. And then they smoke as well in that chapter. Basically, intelligence doesn't define success, is what he kind of what I got from that chapter. I'm not going to go into it, but there was a guy, they called it the termites. The termites. There was a guy, he had a whole load of children or child geniuses, and they kind of followed them through their lives to see what they would do, like it's like a 10-year study or whatever. And that was interesting, the outcomes of that. Again, if you want to find out more, read the book. I did want to ask you a question, Tito.
Go on.
Because I know time's going. Like, where do you think you got your 10,000 hours?
Oh, that is a great question. Where do I think?
Because I think that's an underlying factor in the whole, through the whole book, but it pops up in a lot of different chapters.
Yeah.
So yeah, where do you think you got your 10,000 hours?
That is a great question. Because I feel like I've got 1,000 hours in a lot of different areas.
That's still 10,000. 1 times 10.
Do you know what I mean? I don't think there's a specific thing that I would say, 10,000 hours. Yeah. That's a very good question. Where do you think you've got yours? I'm gonna think
similar to you. Like, I think, to stay on you for a minute, I feel like your hours are in your social skills, your emotional intelligence, your work, right? Your drive for work. You know what I mean? So, jobs you've done in the past. That's how I look at it. And I guess because I kind of relate that to myself as well. Like, being able to wake up and go to work is even a skill.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people can't do that. Literally just that. Do you know what I'm saying? So being able to communicate with people in a correct manner being able to listen to people is you know what I mean? Things like that. So it's not necessarily like, oh yeah, I'm a science, like if you maybe I'm not thinking like Bill Gates, 10,000 hours on a computer, boom, 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 boom. That's, I don't think, same to you, I don't think I've got like 10,000 hours specifically in any one thing. But I think as, you know, as an entrepreneur, or as someone that is quite divergent, that does a lot of different things, the 10,000 hours are accumulated within that and within the strand that goes through. And I think, yeah, and if I talk about myself, just working hard and yeah, just trying my best, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But because it's interesting, because obviously I look back on myself and I think, like, especially with like Fit for Life Youth, and before I started Fit for Life Youth, I worked a lot in the community. You know, I worked in schools, I worked in the play service, I worked in sports clubs and stuff like that. So it's funny now, a lot of the young people that I worked with when they were like 5, 6 are now, we're talking 20, they're grown. But when I see them, or even in the schools that I worked with, people that weren't on the same level as me. So if I was a PE teacher or a TA, and there was a class teacher that I worked in her class, she's now ahead. Do you see what I mean? For example, so it just makes, so do you know what I mean? So seeds, but at the time I was oblivious to it, because I wasn't, so like I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to do this in 10 years. But those sort of situations there, it all kind of comes together. So yeah. But yeah, no, it made me think a lot about stuff like that, this book.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. I'm going to ponder on that over the next hour or so after this review. Very quickly, do you want to touch on the Korean Airways?
That chapter. Yeah. But you start.
I mean, I liked this chapter. I think partly because I liked it as well, because I've previously lived with Koreans, so I understand their culture a bit more than the average person. And my experience with their culture is they're very polite, very caring, very respectful, and also they respect their elders. That's a big part of their culture. They respect their seniors and they respect their elders. They've got a hierarchy system as such. So, for example, I lived with 4 Koreans. 4 Koreans, and the eldest one, they all respected the eldest one slightly more than the others. Not necessarily because they did anything different. They just spoke to them slightly different with, slightly more respect. And in actually the Korean language, there are particular words that they use for their elders when they're discussing. So I say all that to say, with the Korean Airways, there was a few plane crashes, and they basically put it down to their culture and their cultural way of thinking. So yeah, there was many years ago, there were a few plane crashes, and the co-pilot would be scared to tell the main pilot, we're low on fuel, we need to take this turn in here, or we need to do this, we need to put, I don't know how planes work, but they were scared to speak up and tell the main pilot that there was something wrong. So what they would do is just plant the seed. I think, maybe we should have a look at this. Maybe we should have a look at that. And that's because of how their cultural system is. This led to planes crashing. When they listened back to the audio box, it led to planes crashing many years ago. I don't know if you want to touch on that bit before we come.
I mean, yeah, like there's nothing more to say, to be fair. Yeah, you said it perfectly. And this was really sad reading this chapter, because you think about that. This chapter was the one, because I was reading it and I was like, well, I'm reading about plane crashes, like, so, real life. It's not a film. Do you know what I mean? But yeah. Sorry, yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So what they had to do, just to add as well now, the Korean Airways, this particular company, Korean Airways is now one of the most safest airlines in the world. But they got in an expert to change their airline culture. So they got all the Korean pilots and everyone, staff to learn English. One, to give them a new identity. So it was kind of like, here, we're going to do all of our communication in English. This is your new identity. This is your airway identity, to take away that cultural barrier. And
they called it the power distance.
The distance.
Yeah, the power distance, yeah.
Yeah. So they gave them this new persona, which then allowed them to communicate effectively and tell the pilots if something was up. And I believe the culture now in the airline industry is that the pilot has to justify why they're doing something to the co-pilot. The co-pilot has to always say, right, did you do this? And the main yes, I did it, or whatever, however it works. But the culture shift on airlines is now different. The pilot is not, this senior or authoritarian figure. They're now, equal, or the co-pilot's job is now to challenge the pilot for the safety of the airline. And I found that interesting how they shifted that. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add on to
No,
it.
yeah, I think it was good that they recognized that, because you're saving lives, literally. And I think one of the ways they recognized it, that cultural difference, because I think they said, like, the way when they fly, they definitely mentioned New York airport as, like, the people in the New York airport, when they're talking to them through radio about landing, they're very short and sharp and whatnot. But because there's no time, they ain't got time to talk nicely with you or polite. You want to get that information over to you as quickly as possible, and they want the information back as quickly as possible. So I think the fact that they recognized it, and the fact that they put in processes, because that's what you have to do. You have to recognize the problem and then say, okay, how can we stop this from happening again? When it happens the first time, it could be a fluke. But then this is something that, without kind of looking into it properly, may have been put down to, like, oh, well, Koreans just can't fly planes. That's kind of something that someone may have said at the time, or Korean Air is a bad airline because they're, for whatever reason. So no, it was an interesting chapter, but it's quite a sad chapter in a way, because you think about especially when you go back and you read the communication between the first captain and the pilot, the transcript, you're like, wow, man. Imagine, and obviously I'm Nigerian, so I definitely understand respecting your elders, and respecting your elders regardless of who or what they are. They're your elder. You don't call them by the name, you call them uncle or auntie. You see what I mean? So I'm thinking, in that dynamic, being held by that dynamic where you're about to crash into a mountain, and you are still not going to say we're about to crash into a mountain. You're going to suggest it. So it just shows the culture, like, that culture was holding them back in that regard, in that situation. Yeah. And that's why it was a good thing that they said, we have to speak English, because what that does now is there's no now different words, because I think what they said is there's a different word. Like, I would speak to you, I might talk about water bottle, but I won't say to you, I'll say water bottle, but to an elder, I would say a different thing, or I would, or not. So now when you're speaking English, those words don't exist in the English language. So it was, it was an interesting chapter. Definitely interesting.
Yeah. Right. There's so much more we could talk about, but let's move on to our difficulty rating. You go first. How difficult was this book to read?
It was the chapters were quite long. They got longer as the book went on. I'll give it about a 3.5 as difficulty.
Okay. And I'll go on to it. It wasn't easy, but I didn't find it super hard as well. I think the fact that I enjoyed the book made it easier. I'll give it a 2.5 for me. The chapters were long, but I enjoyed it, which made it not seem long. And also his writing style is quite nice to read. I liked his style. Star rating. How good was this book out of 5?
I'm not going to let this conversation influence my decision. So, because I knew before, in my head, I had a number, and I thought, after speaking to Tyler, I'm more than likely going to want to push it up a number, but I'm going to stick. So I'm going to give it a 3.
Okay.
3. I would recommend it. No, I would recommend it. There's definitely some good chapters in the book. The reason I'm not giving it anything higher is because in the middle, it did kind of get just a bit boring. I don't know. I just kind of lost. I stopped enjoying reading it at some point. Then I restarted enjoying it again.
Okay, so there were some chapters that maybe
the beginning I loved it. I was like boom, boom, boom. Then it kind of I was kind of like it's a bit boring.
No,
And then
I like the whole book. I like the whole book, and I'm giving this a 4. This is a good read. And yeah, definitely recommend it. So yeah, right. Next month, our book is As a Man Thinketh. This is Mr. Fly's book. Chris decided to pick this book. Yeah, we'll discuss why he picked it next month. Watch what video is on the screen now. Remember, like and subscribe, support the ting, and yeah, see you in the next one.